Hello, welcome to our course, Worship and Praise. Uh, this week we're going to break from our series on finding the comfort of Christ. Although, of course, it's not a complete break. I'm going to talk about Jesus Christ, but I'm going to focus on Easter. I think Easter was celebrated this past Sunday. It's still Easter week. I think it's a Puhal, right? Korean name for Easter. So Christians around the world gathered on Sunday, if they were allowed. In many countries, there were restrictions on the number who go to church, and sometimes in complete shutdown of churches. I'm happy to say I was able to go to a church on Sunday and celebrate Easter. Hope that you did too if you wanted to go. It's a beautiful time of the year. It's a beautiful, beautiful celebration. So we have to say something about Easter. It's the most important holiday or Christian holiday in the Christian year. So Christianity has a calendar, a church calendar, and of course the only day that most people know about is Christmas. That's the only Christian holiday we have in Korea. Other countries in Europe, especially, they have a lot more Christian holidays. Sometimes, I mean, 4 or 5 Christian holidays. Even in countries like France, which is very secular, and people are not very religious at all anymore, but still it maintains these traditional holidays. We think of Christmas as the most important day, but it's really not the most important day. If there's any holiday, any day that should be a holiday in Korea, it should be Easter. Easter falls on a Sunday, though, so it always falls on a Sunday, although the date changes. So it doesn't seem to work as a good holiday, but many countries have. Where I'm from, Canada, Monday is a holiday, so you have Easter Monday, and also you have Friday. The Friday before Easter is also a holy day. It's Good Friday. So there's two. A lot of schools, universities are closed for 4 days. Monday, they're closed on a Friday, and they're closed on a Monday. Many businesses are closed on one of those days, either Friday or Monday. And some of them are still on both. Banks are closed on 1 or 2 of those days. But in Korea, everything is open. It's Christians were very claimed great victory when they got Christmas to be made a holiday here. It's not likely to. Cambridge University should have Easter. It should have an Easter holiday. It has a Christian foundation. It teaches Christianity here. Courses like this, but sadly, it's not the case. Perhaps this is a reflection of the lack of faith in Easter and the lack of interest in it as a for Christian faith. But as we'll learn, hopefully this is should not be the case, because this is what when people think of Easter, they think of Easter bunnies and Easter eggs. I mean, kids especially, but for a lot of people too, adults, it seems like Easter is not much more than Easter eggs and chocolates and that. And This is really nothing to do with you know, Easter, with the Christian understanding of Easter. Easter is about the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. He was raised up and he is risen, right? It's important to remember that he was raised and he is remain raised above the world. So the New Testament, the Christian part of the Bible, it's filled with this faith in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Outside the Gospels, of course, all the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, talk about describe the suffering, the death of Christ, his crucifixion, and they all describe his resurrection. Except for the Gospel of Mark, but we're not going to get into that. The Gospel of Mark doesn't say anything about describe the resurrection. It points to it talks about the empty tomb. The ending, the resurrection story is there, but people think it was added later because maybe it was lost. But if you beyond the Gospels, when we get to the Acts of the Apostles and the letters of Paul, you cannot make sense of these letters without believing in the resurrection of Christ, or without recognizing the importance of the resurrection of Jesus Christ for the church, for the apostles, for Paul, for Peter, James, and John, for the whole church. We see this very early in the Acts of the Apostles, which is written by Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke. So we have these words from Peter. Peter is the first apostle to begin preaching Christ and preaching. And what he starts to preach, tell the world, all in Jerusalem, that Jesus was raised up. He says, God has raised this Jesus to life, and we're all witnesses of it, all witnesses. So that's what got the church talking. That's what got Christianity going. The apostles, when Jesus died on the cross, they did not expect him to see him again. They were depressed. They thought their hopes were destroyed. They believed in the resurrection of the body. They were Jews, but they thought this would happen at the end of history, in the end of time. And Jews today still believe in the resurrection. Even Muslims believe in it. Sadly, there's a lot of Christians in the world who don't believe in it. And I don't know how you can be a Christian and not believe. If you don't believe in a resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, then you're not a Christian. And you can't have Christianity without it. It's not enough to say that Jesus was a good teacher. He was a nice guy. His Sermon on the Mount is fantastic. That he practices social justice and all that's good, of course, but without the resurrection of Jesus Christ, everything he said and done on earth stays with him, dies with him. And he can just be an inspiration only for us. Maybe he's a good example for us. But Jesus is more than a good example for us in the world. He's more than just an inspiration. He lives for us. He is risen from the dead. He lives out. Where does he live? Well, I don't want to get deep in. He lives outside this world, beyond our space and time. Science cannot find him. Astronauts and rockets are not going to find them. SpaceX, Tesla's the SpaceX rocket program is not going to find him. The Soviet cosmonauts couldn't find him, because he's not to be found in our outer space. God created this world. He's outside this world. But he lives, and he lives bodily. That's the thing. He does not live in spirit. He's not raised in spirit. He's raised bodily. It's a new body, but it's still a body. It's a spiritual body that does not die, cannot die. It's a spiritual body that can transcend our space and time limitations. And this is when the apostles saw Jesus Christ in the flesh, we saw him. At first, they didn't recognize him, and they sat. There's a story in Luke where they sat down and ate with him, but they didn't even know it at first. He was sitting with them. Here are the disciples who walked with Jesus. They were at him until the point of his death on the cross. Yet when he was raised to death, they saw, and he was sitting across from them, eating with them. They could not recognize him because his body was not quite the same as it was. There was something different about him. They didn't recognize him. Only when they broke bread, only in the breaking of bread, when Jesus had a communion with them, that their eyes were opened. And it's the same with us. We cannot understand or grasp Jesus Christ as risen until he touches us, till his spirit opens our eyes, and then we can see him. Else we're blind to him. We're blind to the fact that he is the Son of God who has come into the world, who died and took away our sins, and was raised back to life. And so he is the new humanity. We talk about humanism. We talk about the humanities. We have to talk about Jesus Christ if we want to talk about humanism. He represents the future of humanity, not artificial intelligence. Or that's why we have to. That's why we cling to Jesus. We must cling to Christ because he represents the future of humanity. Without Jesus Christ, the future of humanity is lost. With Jesus Christ, humanity has a future, has a hope, an everlasting life, a life with God, and life in the body, not just a spiritual life, but life in the body as it was meant to be lived. And so this is what got the disciples excited when they realized that Jesus had raised them, that they just started talking about him. They couldn't stop talking about him. They started running across the city of Jerusalem, and they started running across Israel, and they start traveling across the Roman Empire, like as Paul did, telling the world that God had raised Jesus up and that he had died for the sins of the world, and that the fact that he was raised up proves to the world that he is the chosen one. He is the promise made to Israel. He is the hope of Israel, the hope of the world. He is the Messiah. But also, there's a new revelation that he is the Son of God, as only the Son of God could have come back to life. Nobody resurrected him. Nobody put him back together. Only God did it. It was a sheer miracle. God, Jesus Christ, overcame the world, overcame death, and death is the greatest fear we all have, right? I mean, why does everybody want to get immunized against the coronavirus? Why are people running and lining up for vaccines? Because they don't want to die. They fear death. Death is our greatest fear, and that's something that hasn't changed and will never change. And we all have to go through that valley of death. And unless you have faith in Jesus Christ, you will go through it alone. You will go in darkness. You will never see the light of God. And in Acts 10, God raised him up on the third day and allowed him to appear. So it was God who raised him up. The power of God did it, right? And there was no human involvement in it. There was no tricks involved in it. So on the third day, to prove that he was really dead, right? It wasn't 3 hours. He was dead on a cross. He gave up his own life. He was dead and buried. So Paul says in Corinthians, now I would remind you, brothers and sisters, of the good news that I proclaimed to you, right? The good news. For I handed unto you as of first importance what I in turn had received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures. So the point here too is that Paul is telling the church here that everything that happened to Jesus was prophesied in the scriptures. And Jesus told his disciples too as he's raised that, look, everything that happened to me was talked about in the scriptures, was predicted, was prophecies. You know, go read the prophets. I mean, you have to read carefully, of course, but it's there. It's concealed there. So what happened then to Jesus was part of God's plan. It was part of God's plan long before Jesus came into the world. And his resurrection is the completion of the story. It's a major chapter in the story of God's salvation. So, and without the resurrection, there would have been no church. There would be no Christianity. So that's what Christians have been doing for 2,000 years, telling the world that Jesus died for sins, that he was buried, and he was raised up on the third day, and that he's going to come again in history to judge the world. And now is the time not just to enjoy life, to see the world. It is a time to turn to Jesus Christ, to have faith in him, to accept his forgiveness of sins, to turn from our sins, and to have make him your greatest comfort. Right? That's what we've been talking about. All right, so that's the significance, the meaning of Easter. Without Easter, Christianity, falls apart. There can be no Christianity. There can be no hope without the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the best news for us is that Jesus' resurrection is a glimpse into our future, if we have faith in that, that we will be raised too in like manner on the last day. That's why the gospel is called the good news. We have no need to fear death anymore. We don't have to go on living with guilt for our sins. All right, so that's our message for this week. I pray that you will reflect on it and that you will think deeply about the meaning of Easter and the importance of the resurrection of Jesus Christ for faith, for your faith, and that you'll be strengthened in faith and hope through the story of Jesus' resurrection from the dead. See you next week. Bye.